What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Vega Pod. On this channel, we'll be discussing Christian and secular issues from a biblical perspective. We're going to be looking at Psalm 119, verses 81 through 88. As always, we're going to be using the ESV for our verses. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. Excuse me. My soul longs for your salvation. I hope in your word. My eyes long for your promise. I ask, when will you comfort me? For I have become like a wineskin in the smoke. Yet I have not forgotten your statutes. How long must your servant endure? When will you judge those who persecute me? The insolent have dug pitfalls for me. They do not live according to your law. All your commandments are sure. They persecute me with falsehood. Help me. They have almost made an end of me on earth, but I have not forsaken your precepts. In your steadfast love, give me life, that I may keep the testimonies of your mouth. All right. So verse 81. My soul longs for your salvation. I hope in your word. This is a passionate desire, not something that is fleeing. For the Jews, the soul was the core of their being. This longing was at the very core of his person. Think about a close loved one you haven't seen in quite some time. Or if you're married, think about being away from your spouse for an unimaginable period of time. Now imagine how much you would desire to see or be with that person. This is what the psalmist is conveying to us. Consider that this psalm was written by David or Ezra, and we can tell that this desire for salvation was not a trivial matter. When we think of salvation, we immediately think of being saved, but that's not what the psalmist has in view here. As we will see in the next few verses, he is longing for salvation from those who wish to do him harm. As the psalmist is expressing his passionate plea for salvation, he knows where his hope lies in God's word. Too often, we believers find ourselves in boats of hopelessness and despair when we ought to be spending time in his word. Verse 82. My eyes long for your promise. I ask, when will you comfort me? Our eyes reveal how we are really feeling, no matter how much of a front we try to put on. The psalmist isn't trying to hide how he is really feeling. The desire of his soul is openly on display. What is the promise he longs for? We are told in the previous verse that the promise is salvation. No matter what he is facing or what he is enduring, the psalmist knows that the Lord is his source of comfort. If this was written after returning from exile by Ezra, think about all that the people of Israel had to endure. Verse 83. For I have become like a wineskin in the smoke, yet I have not forgotten your statutes. When I read the word wineskin, the first thing that comes to mind is Jesus telling the religious leaders that you don't put new wine into old wineskins because they will break, they'll burst. Think about wineskin or any delicate material being exposed to smoke. What will happen to it? It'll get worn out. The psalmist is tired. He is exhausted from all the fleeing and threats he has had to endure. Yet, as exhausted as he has not forgotten the Lord's statutes. Whenever we respond or act in a way that is less than Christ-like, we tend to excuse it with, I've had a really long day, or I'm having a bad day. Rather than making excuses, we ought to reflect on what God has to say. Verse 84. How long must your servant endure? When will you judge those who persecute me? Notice the pattern: your salvation, your word, your promise, your statutes, your servant. All of these come from the Lord and belong to the Lord. If the servant here is David, then think about the constant threat of death he endured. If Ezra, then think about the constant opposition he faced as the people worked to rebuild the wall, as if rebuilding the wall wasn't hard enough. The psalmist knows that judgment belongs to the Lord, and he longs for justice. Salvation and justice go hand in hand. Verse 85. The insolent have dug pitfalls for me. They do not live according to your law. The wicked or rebellious ones want to see the psalmist perish. They plot and scheme ways to bring forward his demise. The law was given to Israel for them to show the rest of the nations how to live. As we read the Old Testament, we see that the surrounding nations rejected God's law. And if we consider that this psalm was written by David, then we know how often Saul attempted to take his life, right? He was constantly trying to kill David. Verse 86, all your commandments are sure. They persecute me with falsehood. Help me. It's a passionate plea there, a passionate plea for help. We live in a time when we are pressured to go with the flow, to acquiesce to what the world deems to be right. We think this is only true of us, but consider for a moment how much pressure Israel faced from surrounding nations to acquiesce to their way of doing things. Think about the people living there and how they had to hear from other people how their way of living was old-fashioned or to get with the times. Now look at how the psalmist responds. All your commandments are sure. God's word is solid. It's true. Don't be dissuaded by false ideologies and new teachings. The accusations being brought forth against the psalmist were false. Think back to the last video where we talked about Ezra, Tobiah, and Sanballat, or David and Saul. Verse 87, they have almost made an end of me on earth, but I have not forsaken your precepts. These false accusations could have cost the psalmist his life. But the wicked, they don't care about that. They only care about getting their way. While it wasn't as clear back then, the psalmist knew that death on this side wasn't the end. When we are being falsely accused, it's really tempting to respond in ways that aren't godly. We must remember to keep God's word close to us so that when these moments happen, we can honor Christ with our response. The psalmist is able to respond the way he does because he keeps God's word close to him. Verse 88, in your steadfast love, give me life, that I may keep the testimonies of your mouth. I know I've said this a few times, but I'm going to keep saying it because it's important. The psalmist is able to live according to God's law because the Lord empowers him to do so. It's not by his own strength. Why does the psalmist want life? So that he can keep his testimonies and be a witness to the world. Notice that the psalmist's request for longer life and comfort is not based on who he is or what he has done. It is solely based on the Lord and on his word. All right. As we've done for the last couple of videos, we're going to look at a couple examples from the Warren Westby Bible commentary. This is the Old Testament one. He does have one for the New Testament as well. All right, here we go. Verse 81, this is what he says. His inner person was exhausted from longing for God to work. His eyes were strained from watching for some evidence of his presence. He quotes Lamentations 2, verse 11. For verse 83, he felt like a dried up wineskin that had been thrown aside as useless. For verses 84 and 85, this is what he has to say. How long and when? These questions have often been asked by suffering saints, even by martyrs in heaven, because they are the natural response of people who are suffering. The enemy may be digging pits, but the Lord will see to it that they fall into them first. I thought the last part was actually pretty funny. All right. Let me change my view here. Cool. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, let me pull these up here really quick. Hit that like button, share, subscribe. And if you're not already, follow me on Instagram at @_VegaPod. I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in. Have a blessed week.